dreaded without knowing it. The enemy must have some great need or purpose, said Dragash. But what it is that makes him look to those distant and desolate paths, I cannot guess. What do you mean? Said I. I have been told that wherever they go, the riders ask for news of a land called Shire. The Shire, I said, for even the wise might fear to withstand the Nine when they are gathered together under their fell chieftain. A great king and sorcerer he was of old, and now he wields a deadly fear. Who told you and who sent you? I asked. Saruman the White, answered Radagast, and he told me to say that if you feel the need, he will help, but you must seek his aid at once, or it will be too late. And that message brought me hope, for Saruman the White is the greatest of my order. Radagast is, of course, a worthy wizard, a master of shapes and changes of hue, and he has much lore of herbs and beasts and birds, and especially his friends. But Saruman has long studied the arts of the enemy himself, and thus we have often been able to forestall him. It was by the devices of Saruman that we drove him from Dol Guldur. It might be that he had found some weapons that would drive back the Nine. I will go to Saruman, I said. Then you must go. Now, said Radagast, for I have wasted time in looking for you, and the days are running short. I was told to find you before midsummer, and that is now here. Even if you set out from this spot, you will hardly reach him before the Nine discover the land that they seek. I myself shall turn back at once. And with that he mounted and would have ridden straight off. Stay a moment, I said. We shall need your help, and the help of all things that we will give it. Send out messages to all the beasts and birds that are your friends, to bring news of anything that bears on this matter to Saruman and Gandalf. Let messages be sent to Orthanc. I will do that, he said, and he rode off, as if the Nine were after him. I could not follow him then and there. I had ridden very far already that day, and I was as weary as my horse, and I needed to consider matters. I stayed the night in Bree, and decided that I had no time to return to the Shire. Never did I make a greater mistake. However, I wrote a message to Frodo, and trusted to my friend the innkeeper to send it to him. I rode away at dawn, and I came at long last to the dwelling of Saruman. That is far south in Isengard, in the end of the Misty Mountains, not far from the Gap of Rohan. And Boromir will tell you that it is a great open vale that lies between the Misty Mountains and the northernmost foothills of Ered Nimrais, the White Mountains of his home. And Isengard is a circle of sheer rocks that enclose a valley as if with a wall, and in the midst of that valley is a tower of stone called Orthanc. It was not made by Saruman, but by the men of Númenor long ago, and it is very tall and has many secrets. Yet it looks not to be a work of craft. It cannot be reached save by passing the circle of Isengard, and in that circle there is only one gate. Right one evening I came to the gate, like a great arch in the wall of rock, and it was strongly guarded. But the keepers of the gate were on the watch for me, and told me that Saruman awaited me. I rode under the arch, and the gate closed silently behind me. And suddenly I was afraid, though I knew no reason for it. But I rode to the foot of Orthanc, and came to the stair of Saruman, and there he met me and led me up to his high chamber. He wore a ring on his finger. "So you have come, Gandalf," he said to me gravely, but in his eyes there seemed to be a white light, as if a cold laughter was in his heart. "Yes, I have come," I said. "I have come for your aid, Saruman the White." And that title seemed to anger him.
"Have you indeed, Gandalf the Grey?"
he scoffed.
"For aid? It has seldom been heard of that Gandalf the Grey sought for aid. One so cunning and so wise, wandering about the lands, and concerning himself in every business, whether it belongs to him or not."
I looked at him and wondered. "But if I am not deceived," said I, "things are now moving which require the union of all our strength."
"That may be so," he said, "but the thought is late in coming to you. How long, I wonder, have you concealed from me, the head of the council, a matter of greatest import? What brings you now from your lurking place in the Shire?"
"The Nine have come forth again," I answered. "They have crossed the river, so Radagast said to me."
"Radagast the Brown,"
laughed Saruman, and he had no longer concealed his scorn.
Radagast the bird tamer! Radagast the simple! Radagast the fool! Yet he had just the wit to play the part that I set him. For you have come, and that was all the purpose of my message. And here you will stay, Gandalf the Grey, and rest from journeys. For I am Saruman the Wise, Saruman Ringmaker, Saruman of many colors.
I looked then and saw that his robes, which had seemed white, were not so, but were woven of all colors, and if he moved they shimmered and changed hue so that the eye was bewildered. I liked white better, I said.
White!
He sneered.
It serves as a beginning. White cloth may be dyed, the white page can be overwritten, and the white light can be broken.
In which case it is no longer white, said I. And he that breaks a thing to find out what it is has left the path of wisdom.
You need not speak to me as to one of the fools that you take for friends,
said he.
I have not brought you hither to be instructed by you, but to give you a choice.
He drew himself up, and then began to declaim, as if he were making a speech long rehearsed.
The elder days are gone. The middle days are passing. The younger days are beginning. The time of the elves is over, but our time is at hand. The world of men, which we must rule, but we must have power. Power to order all things as we will, for that good which only the wise can see. And listen, Gandalf, my old friend and helper, he said, coming near and speaking now in a softer voice. I said we, for we it may be, if you will join with me. A new power is rising. Against it the old allies and policies will not avail us at all. There is no hope left in elves or dying Numenor. This, then, is one choice before you, before us. We may join with that power. It would be wise, Gandalf. There is hope that way. Its victory is at hand, and there will be rich reward for those that aid it. As the power grows, its proved friends will also grow, and the wise, such as you and I, may with patience come at last to direct its courses, to control it. We can bide our time. We can keep our thoughts in our hearts, deploring maybe evils done by the way, but approving the high and ultimate purpose. Knowledge, rule, order. All the things that we have so far striven in vain to accomplish, hindered rather than helped by our weak or idle friends. There need not be, there would not be, any real change in our designs, only in our meat. Saruman, I said, I have heard speeches of this kind before, but only in the mouths of the emissaries sent from Mordor to deceive the ignorant. I cannot think that you brought me so far only to weary my ears. He looked sidelong and paused a while, considering. Well, I see that this wise cause does not commend itself to you, he said. Not yet. Not if some better way can be contrived. He came and laid his long hand on my arm. And why not, Gandalf? He whispered. Why not? The ruling ring. If we could command that, then the power will pass to us. That is in truth why I brought you here. For I have many eyes in my service, and I believe that you know where this precious thing now lies. Is it not so? Or why do the nigh ask for the Shire? And what is your business there? As he said this, a lust which he could not conceal shone suddenly in his eyes. Saruman, I said, standing away from him, only one hand at a time can wield the one, and you know that well, so do not trouble to say we. But I could not give it, I would not even give news of it to you, now that I learn your mind.
You were head of the council, but you have unmasked yourself at last. Well, the choices are, it seems, to submit to Sauron or to yourself. I will take neither. Have you others to offer? He was now cold and perilous.
Yes,
he said.
I did not expect you to show wisdom, even in your own behalf. But I gave you the chance of aiding me willingly, and so saving yourself much trouble and pain. The third choice is to stay here. Until the end.
Until what end?
Until you reveal to me where the One may be found. I may find means to persuade you, or until it is found in your despite, and the ruler has time to turn to larger matters. To devise, say, a fitting reward for the hindrance and insolence of Gandalf the Grey.
That may not prove to be one of the lighter matters, said I. He laughed at me, for my words were empty, and he knew it. They took me, and they sent me alone on the pinnacle of Orthanc, in the place where Saruman was accustomed to watch the stars. There is no descent save by a narrow stair of many thousand steps, and the valley below seemed far away. I looked on it and saw that, whereas it had once been green and fair, it was now filled with pits and forges. Wolves and orcs were housed in Isengard, for Saruman was mustering a great force on his own account, in rivalry of Sauron, and not in his service yet. Over all his works a dark smoke hung and wrapped itself about the size of Orthanc. I stood alone, on an island in the clouds, and I had no chance of escape, and my days were bitter. I was pierced with cold. I had but little room in which to pace to and fro, brooding on the coming of the riders of the north. That the Nine had indeed arisen, I felt assured, apart from the words of Saruman which might be lies. Long ere I came to Isengard, and I had heard tidings by the way that could not be mistaken. Fear was ever in my heart for my friends in the Shire, but I still had some hope. I hoped that Frodo had set forth at once, as my letter had urged, and that he had reached Rivendell before the deadly pursuit began. And both my fear and my hope proved ill-founded, for my hope was founded on a fat man in Bree, and my fear was founded on the cunning of Sauron. But fat men who sell ale have many calls to answer, and the power of Sauron is still less than fear makes it. But in the circle of Isengard, trapped and alone, it was not easy to think that the hunters before whom all have fled or fallen would falter in the Shire far away.
"I saw you!" cried Frodo. "You were walking backwards and forwards. The moon shone in your hair." Gandalf paused, astonished, and looked at him. "It was only a dream," said Frodo. "It suddenly came back to me. I had quite forgotten it. It came some time ago, after I left the Shire, I think."
"Then it was late in coming," said Gandalf. "As you will see, I was in an evil plight, and those who know me will agree that I have seldom been in such need, and do not bear such misfortune well. Gandalf the Grey, caught like a fly in a spider's treacherous web. Yet even the most subtle spiders may leave a weak thread. At first I feared that Saruman no doubt intended that Radagast had also fallen, yet I had caught no hint of anything wrong in his voice or in his eye at our meeting. If I had, I should have never gone to Isengard, or I should have gone more warily. So Saruman guessed, and he had concealed his mind and deceived his messenger. I would have been useless in any case to try and win over the honest Radagast to treachery. He sought me in good faith, and so persuaded me. That was the undoing of Saruman's plot, for Radagast knew no reason why he should not do as I asked, and he rode away towards Mirkwood, where he had many friends of old. And the eagles of the mountains went far and wide, and they saw many things, the gathering of wolves, and the mustering of orcs, and the 9 riders going hither and thither in the lands. And they heard news of the escape of Gollum, and they sent a messenger to bring these tidings to me. So it was that when summer waned, there came a night of moon, and Gwaihir, the Wind-Lord, swiftest of the great eagles, came unlooked for to Orthanc, and he found me, standing on the pinnacle. Then I spoke to him, and he bore me away before Saruman was aware. I was far from Isengard. Here the wolves and orcs issued from the gate to pursue me. "How far can you bear me?" I said to Gwaihir. "Many leagues," said he. but not to the ends of the earth. I was sent to bear tidings or burdens. Then I must have steed on land, I said, and the steeds are passingly swift, for I have never had such need of haste before. Then I will bear you to Edoras, where the Lord of Rohan sits in his horse, he said. That is not very far off. And I was glad, for the Riddermark of Rohan, or Rohirrim, the horse lords, well. There are no horses like those that are bred in that great vale between the misty mountains and the white. Are the men of Rohan still to be trusted, do you think? I said to Guy here, for the treason of Saruman had shaken my faith. They pay tribute to horses, he answered, and send many yearly to Mordor, or so it is said. But they are not yet under the yoke. But if Saruman had become evil as you say, then their doom cannot be long delayed. He set me down in the land of Rohan near dawn, and now I have lengthened my tale over long. The rest must be more brief. In Rohan I found evil already at work, the lies of Saruman, and the king of the land would not listen to my warnings. He bade me take a horse and be gone, and I chose one much to my liking, but little to his. I took the best horse in his land, and I have never seen the like of him.
Then he must be a noble beast indeed, said Aragorn. And it grieves me more than many tidings that might seem worse to learn that Sauron levies much tribute. It was not so when last I was in that land. Nor is it now, I will swear, said Boromir. It is a lie that comes from the enemy. I know the men of Rohan, true and valiant, our allies, dwelling still in the lands that we gave them long ago. The shadow of Mordor lies on distant lands, answered Aragorn. Saruman has fallen under it. Rohan is beset. Who knows what you will find there, if ever you return? Not this, at least, said Boromir, for they will buy their lives with horses. They love their horses next to their kin, and not without reason, for the horses of the Riddermark come from the fields of the north, far from the shadow, and their race, as of their masters, is descended on the free days of old. True indeed, said Gandalf. And there is one among them that might have been foaled in the morning of the world. The horses of the Nine cannot vie with him, tireless, swift as the flowing wind. Shadowfax, they called him. By day his coat glistens like silver, and by night it is like a shade, and he passes unseen. Light is his footfall. Never before had any man mounted him, but I took him and I tamed him, and so speedily he bore me that I reached the Shire when Frodo was on the Barrow Downs, though I set out from Rohan only when he set out from Hobbiton. But fear grew in me as I rode. Ever as I came north I heard tidings of the riders. Though I gained on them day by day, they were ever before me. They had divided their forces, I learned. Some remained on the eastern borders, not far from the Greenway, and some invaded the Shire from the south. I came to Hobbiton when Frodo had gone, but I had words with old Gamgee. Many words, and few to the point. He had much to say about the shortcomings of the new owners of Bag End.
"I can't abide changes," said he. "Not at my time of life. At least of all changes for the worst. Changes for the worst,"
he repeated many times. Worst is a bad word, I said to him, and I hope you do not live to see it. But amidst his talk I gathered at last that Frodo had left Hobbiton less than a week before, and that a black horseman had come to the hill the same evening. Then I rode on in fear. I came to Buckland and found it in uproar, as busy as a hive of ants that had been stirred with a stick. I came to the house of Crickhollow, and it was broken open and empty, but on the threshold there lay a cloak that had been Frodo's. Then for a while hope left me, and I did not wait to gather news, or I might have been comforted. But I rode on the tale of the riders. It was hard to follow, for it went many ways, and I was at a loss. But it seemed to me that one or two had ridden towards Bree, and that way I went, for I thought of words that might be said to the innkeeper. Butterbur, they call him, thought I. If this delay was his fault, I will melt all the butter in him. I will roast the old fool over a slow fire. He expected no less when he saw my face. He fell down flat and began to melt on the spot.
"Oh, what did you do to him?"
cried Frodo in alarm.
"He was very kind to us and did all that he could."
Gandalf laughed. "Don't be afraid," he said. "I did not bite, and I barked very little. So overjoyed was I by the news that I got out of him when he stopped quaking, that I embraced the old fellow. How it happened I could not then guess, but I learned that you had been in Bree the night before, and had gotten off in that morning the Strider.
Strider!
I cried, shouting for joy.
Yes, sir, I'm afraid so, sir,
said Butterbur, mistaking me.
He got at them, in spite of all I could do, and they took up with him.
They behaved very queer all the time they were here. Wilful, you might say.
Ass, fool, thrice worthy and beloved Parliament, said I. It's the best news I've heard since midsummer. It's worth a gold piece at the least. May your biern be laid under enchantment of surpassing excellence for 7 years, said I.
Now I can take a night's rest. The first since I have forgotten when. So I stayed there that night, wondering much what had become of the riders. For only of 2 had there yet been any news in Bree, it seemed. But in the night we heard more. 5 at least came from the west. They threw down the gates and passed through Bree like a howling wind. And the Bree folk are still shivering and expecting the end of the world. I got up before dawn and went after them. I did not know, but it seems clear to me that this was what happened. Their captain remained in secret away south of Bree, while 2 rode ahead through the village, and 4 more invaded the Shire. But when these were foiled in Bree and at Crick Hollow, they returned to their captain with tidings, and so left the road unguarded for a while, except by their spies. The captain then sent some eastward straight across the country, and he himself with the rest rode along the road in great wrath. I got up to Weathertop like a gale, and I reached it before sundown on my 2nd day from Bree. And they were there before me. They drew away from me, for they felt the coming of my anger, and they dared not face it while the sun was still in the sky. But they closed round at night, and I was besieged on the hilltop in the old ring of Amon-Sul. I was hard put to it indeed. Such light and flame cannot have been seen on Weathertop since the war beacons of old. At sunrise I escaped and fled towards the north. I could not hope to do more. It was impossible to fight you, Frodo, in the wilderness, and it would have been folly to try with all the 9 at my heels. So I had to trust to Aragorn. But I hoped to draw some of them off, and yet reach Rivendell ahead of you and send out help. 4 riders did indeed follow me, but they turned back after a while and made for the ford, it seems. That helped a little, for there were only 5, not 9, when your camp was attacked. I reached here at last by a long hard road up the Horwell and through the Etten Moors, and down from the north. It took me nearly 14 days from Weathertop, for I could not ride among the rocks of the Trollfells, and Shadowfax departed. I sent him back to his master, but a great friendship has grown between us. And if I have need, he will come at my call. But so it was that I came to Rivendell, only 3 days before the ring, and news of its peril had already been brought here, which proved well indeed. And that, Frodo, is the end of my account. May Elrond and the others forgive the length of it, but such a thing has not happened before, that Gandalf broke tryst, and did not come when he promised. An account to the ring-bearer of so strange an event was required, I think. Well, the tale is now told, from first to last. Here we all are, and here is the ring, but we have not yet come any nearer to our purpose. What shall we do with it? There was a silence. At last Elrond spoke again. "This is grievous news concerning Saruman," he said. "For we trusted him, and he is deep in all our counsels. It is perilous to study too deeply the arts of the enemy, for good or ill. But such falls and betrayals, alas, have happened before. Of the tales that we have heard, this day the tale of Frodo was most strange to me. I have known few hobbits save Bilbo here, and it seemed to me that he is perhaps not alone and singular as I thought him. The world has changed much since I last was on the westward roads. The Barrow-wights we know by many names, and of the old forest many tales have been told. All that now remains is but an outlier of its northern march. Time was when a squirrel could go from tree to tree, what now is the Shire, to Dunland, west of Isengard. In those lands I journeyed once, and many tidings, wild and strange, I knew. But I had forgotten Bombadil, if indeed this is still the same that walked in the woods and hills long ago, and even was older than the old. That was not then his name. Eärwain Ben-Adar we called him, oldest and fatherless.
but many another name he has since been given by older folk. Thorn by the dwarves, Orald by northern men, and other names beside. He is a strange creature, but maybe I should have summoned him to our council."
"He would not have come," said Gandalf.
"Could we still not send messages to him and to obtain his help?"
asked Eristor.
"It seems that he has power even over the ring."
"No, I should not put it so," said Gandalf. "Say rather that the ring has no power over him. He is his own master, but he cannot alter the ring himself, nor break its power over others. And now he is withdrawn into a little land, within bounds that he has set, though none can see them, waiting perhaps for a change of days, and he will not step beyond them."
"But within those bounds nothing seems to dismay him," said Eristor. "Would he not take the ring and keep it there forever harmless?"
"No," said Gandalf, "not willingly. He might do so if all the free folk of the world begged him, but he would not understand the need. And if he were ever given the ring, he would soon forget it, or most likely throw it away. Such things have no hold on his mind. He would be a most unsafe guardian, and that alone is answer enough."
"But in any case," said Glorfindel, "to send the ring to him would only postpone the day of evil. He is far away. We could not now take it back to him, unguessed, unmarked by any spy. And even if we could, soon or late the Lord of the Rings would learn of its hiding place and would bend all his power towards it. Could that power be defied by Bombadil alone? I think not. I think that in the end, if all else is conquered, Bombadil will fall, last as he was first, and then night will come."
"I know little of the Ardwine save the name," said Galdor, "but Glorfindel I think is right. Power to defy our enemy is not in him, unless such power is in the earth itself. And yet we see that Sauron cannot torture and destroy the very hills. What power still remains lies with us, here in Imladris, or with Círdan at the Havens, or with Lórien. But have they the strength? Have we here the strength to withstand the enemy, the coming of Sauron at the last, when all else is overthrown?" "I have not the strength," said Elrond. "Neither have they."
"Then if the ring cannot be kept from him forever by strength," said Glorfindel, "two things only remain for us to attempt: to send it over the sea, or destroy it." "But Gandalf has revealed to us that we cannot destroy it by any craft that we here possess," said Elrond. "And they who dwell beyond the sea would not receive it. For good or ill, it belongs to Middle-earth. It is for us who still dwell here to deal with it." "Then," said Glorfindel, "let us cast it into the deeps, and so make the lies of Saruman come true. For it is clear now that even at the council his feet were already on crooked path, and he knew that the ring was not lost forever, but wished for us to think so. For he began to lust for it for himself. Yet oft in lies truth is hidden. In the sea it would be safe."
"Not safe forever," said Gandalf. "There are many things in the deep waters, and seas and lands may change. And it is not our part here to take thought only for a reason, or for a few lives of men, or for a passing of age of the world. We should seek a final end of this menace, even if we do not hope to make one."
"And that we shall not find on roads to the sea," said Galdor. "If the return to Eardwine we thought too dangerous, then flight to the sea is now fraught with gravest peril. My heart tells me that Sauron will expect us to take the western way, when he learns what has befallen. He soon will. The Nine have been unhorsed, indeed, but that is but a respite ere they find new steeds, and swifter. Only the waning might of Gondor stands now between him and a march in power along the coast into the north. And if he comes, assailing the White Towers and the Havens, hereafter the elves may have no escape from the lengthening shadows of Middle-earth." Said Boromir, "Gondor wanes, you say, but Gondor stands, and even the end of its strength is still very strong." "And yet its vigilance can no longer keep back the Nine," said Galdor. "And other roads he may find that Gondor does not guard." Said Eristor, "There are but two courses, as Glorfindel already has declared: to hide the ring forever, or to unmake it. But both are beyond our power. Who will read its riddle for us?"
"None here can do so," said Elrond gravely. "At least none can foretell what will come to pass, if we take this road or that. But it seems to me now clear which is the road that we must take. The westward road seems easiest, therefore it must be shunned. It will be watched. Too often the elves have fled that way. Now at this last we must make a hard road, a road unforeseen. There lies our hope, if hope it be. To walk into peril, to Mordor. We must send the ring to the fire." Silence fell again. Frodo, even in that fair house looking upon a sunlit valley filled with the noise of clear waters, felt a dead darkness in his heart. Boromir stirred, and Frodo looked at him. He was fingering his great horn and frowning. At length he spoke. "I do not understand all this," he said. "Saruman is a traitor. But did he not have a glimpse of wisdom? Why do you speak ever of hiding and destroying? Why should we not think that the great ring has come into our hands to serve us in the very hour of need? Wielding it, the free lords of the free may surely defeat the enemy. That is what he most fears, I deem. The men of Gondor are valiant, and they will never submit. But they may be beaten down. Valinor needs first strength, and then a weapon. Let the ring be your weapon if it has much power as you say. Take it and go forth to victory." "Alas, no," said Elrond. "We cannot use the ruling ring. That we now know too well. It belongs to Sauron, and was made by him alone, and is altogether evil. Save only those who have already a great power of their own. Before them it holds an even deadlier peril. The very desire of it corrupts the heart. Consider Saruman. If any of the wise should with this ring overthrow the Lord of Mordor, using his own arts, he would then set himself on Sauron's throne, and yet another Dark Lord would appear. And that is another reason why the ring should be destroyed. As long as it is in the world, it will be a danger even to the wise, for nothing is evil in the beginning. Even Sauron was not so. I fear to take the ring to hide it. I will not take the ring to wield it." "Nor I," said Gandalf. Boromir looked at them doubtfully, but he bowed his head. "So be it," he said. "Then in Gondor we must trust to such weapons as we have. And at least while the wise ones guard this ring, we will fight on. Mayhap the sword that was broken may still stem the tide. But the hand that wields it has inherited not an heirloom only, but the sinews of the kings of men." "Who can tell?" said Aragorn. "But we will put it to the test one day." "May the day not be too long delayed," said Boromir. "For though I do not ask for aid, we need it. It would comfort us to know that others fought also with all the means that they have." "Then be comforted," said Elrond, "for there are other powers and realms that you know not, and they are hidden from you. Anduin the Great flows past many shores ere it comes to Argonath and the gates of Gondor."
"Still, it might be well for all," said Glóin the dwarf, "if all these strengths were joined, and the powers of each were used in league. Other rings there may be less treacherous that might be used in our need. The seven are lost to us if Balin has not found the ring of Thror, which was the last. Naught has been heard of it since Thror perished in Moria. Indeed, I may now reveal that it was partly in hope to find that ring that Balin went away." "Balin will find no ring in Moria," said Gandalf. "Thror gave it to Thrain, his son, but not Thrain to Thorin. It was taken with torment from Thrain in the dungeons of Dol Guldur. I came too late."
"Alas!"
cried Glóin. "When will the day come of our revenge? But still there are the three. What of the 3 rings of the elves? Very mighty rings, it is said. Do not the elf lords keep them? Yet they too were made by the Dark Lord long ago. Are they idle? I see elf lords here. Will they not say? The elves returned no answer. "Did you not hear me, Gloin?" said Elrond. "The three were not made by Sauron, nor did he ever touch them. But of them it is not permitted to speak. So much only in this hour of doubt I may now say. They are not idle, but they were not made as weapons of war or conquest. That is not their power. Those who made them did not desire strength or domination or hoarded wealth, but understanding, making, and healing. To preserve all things unstained. These things the elves of Middle-earth have in some measure gained, though with sorrow. But all that has been wrought by those who wield the three will turn to their undoing, and their minds and hearts will become revealed to Sauron if he regains the one. It would be better if the three had never been. That is his purpose."
But what then would happen if the ruling ring were destroyed as your counsel?
asked Gloin. "We do not know for certain," answered Elrond sadly. "Some hope that the three rings, which Sauron has never touched, would then become free, and their rulers might heal the hurts of the world that he has wrought. But maybe when the one has gone, the three will fail, and maybe fair things will fade and be forgotten. That is my belief. Yet all the elves are willing to endure this chance," said Glorfindel, "if by the power of Sauron may be broken, and the fear of its dominion be taken away forever. Thus we return once more to the destroying of the ring," said Erestor, "and yet we come no nearer. What strength have we for the finding of the fire in which it was made? That is the path of despair. Of folly, I would say, if the long wisdom of Elrond did not forbid me."
Despair or folly, said Gandalf. It is not despair, for despair is only for those who see the end beyond all doubt. We do not. It is wisdom to recognize necessity when all other courses have been weighed, though as folly it may appear to those who cling to false hope. Yet let folly be our cloak, a veil before the eyes of the enemy, for he is very wise, and weighs all things to a nicety in the scales of his malice. Where the only measure that he knows is desire for power, and so he judges all hearts. Into his heart the thought will not enter that any will refuse it, that having the ring we may seek to destroy it. If we seek this, we shall put him out of reckoning. At least for a while, said Elrond. The road must be trod, but it will be very hard, and neither strength nor wisdom will carry us far upon it. This quest may be attempted by the weak with as much hope as the strong. Yet such is oft the course of deeds that move the wheels of the world. Small hands do them because they must, while the eyes of the great are elsewhere.
Very well, Master Elrond, said Bilbo suddenly. Say no more. It is plain enough what you are pointing at. Bilbo, the silly hobbit, started this affair, and Bilbo better finish it, or himself. It was very comfortable here, and getting on with my book. If you want to know, I was just writing an ending for it. I had thought of putting, and he lived happily ever afterwards to the end of his days. It is a good ending, and none the worse for having been used before. Now I shall have to alter that. It does not look like coming true. And anyway, there will evidently have to be several more chapters if I live to write them. It is a frightful nuisance. When ought I to start?
Boromir looked in surprise at Bilbo, but the laughter died on his lips when he saw that all the others regarded the old hobbit with grave respect. Only Gloin smiled, but his smile came from old memories.
Of course, my dear Bilbo, said Gandalf. If you had really started this affair, you might be expected to finish it. But you know well enough now that starting is too great a claim for any, and that only a small part is played in great deeds by any hero. You need not bow, though the word was meant, and we do not doubt that under jest you are making a valiant offer, but one beyond your strength, Bilbo. You cannot take this thing back. It has passed on. If you need my advice any longer, I should say that your part is ended, unless as a recorder. Finish your book, and leave the ending unaltered. There is still hope for it. But get ready to write a sequel when they come back." Bilbo laughed.
"I have never known you give me pleasant advice before," he said. "As all your unpleasant advice has been good, I wonder if this advice is not bad. Still, I don't suppose I have the strength or luck left to deal with the ring. It has grown, and I have not. But tell me, what do you mean by they?"
"The messengers who are sent with the ring."
"Exactly. And who are they to be? That seems to me what this council has to decide, and all that it has to decide. Elves may thrive on speech alone, and dwarves endure great weariness, but I am only an old hobbit, and I miss my meal at noon. Can't you think of some names now, or put it off till after dinner?"
No one answered. The noon bell rang. Still no one spoke. Frodo glanced at all the faces, but they were not turned to him. All the council sat with downcast eyes, as if in deep thought. A great dread fell on him, as if he was awaiting the pronouncement of some doom that he had long foreseen and vainly hoped might after all never be spoken. An overwhelming longing to rest and remain at peace by Bilbo's side in Rivendell filled all his heart. At last, with an effort, he spoke, and wondered to hear his own words, as if some other will was using his small voice.
"I will take the ring,"
he said.
"though I do not know the way."
Elrond raised his eyes and looked at him, and Frodo felt his heart pierced by the sudden keenness of the glance.
"If I understand aright all that I have heard," he said, "I think that this task is appointed for you, Frodo, and that if you do not find a way, no one will. This is the hour of the Shire folk, when they arise from their quiet fields to shake the towers and councils of the great. Who of all the wise could have foreseen it? Or, if they are wise, why should they expect to know it until the hour has struck? But it is a heavy burden, so heavy that none could lay it on another. I do not lay it on you, but if you take it freely, I will say that your choice is right. And though all the mighty elf friends of old, Hador and Húrin and Túrin and Beren himself were assembled together, your seat should be among them."
Cried Sam, unable to contain himself any longer and jumping up from the corner where he had been quietly sitting on the floor.
"No, indeed," said Elrond, turning towards him with a smile. "You at least shall go with him. It is hardly possible to separate you from him even when he is summoned to a secret council, and you are not."
Sam sat down, blushing and muttering.
"A nice pickle we have landed ourselves in, Mr. Frodo,"
he said, shaking his head. Later that day the hobbits held a meeting of their own in Bilbo's room. Merry and Pippin were indignant that they heard that Sam had crept into the council and had been chosen as Frodo's companion.
"It's most unfair," said Pippin. "Instead of throwing him out and clapping him in the chains, Elrond goes and rewards him of his cheek." "Rewards?" said Frodo. "I can't imagine a more severe punishment. You are not thinking what you're saying. Condemned to go on this hopeless journey, a reward? Yesterday I dreamed that my task was done, and I could rest here. A long while, perhaps for good."
"I don't wonder," said Merry, "and I wish you could. But we are envying Sam, not you.
If you have to go, then it will be a punishment for any of us to be left behind, even in Rivendell. We have come a long way with you, and been through some stiff times. We want to go on." "That's what I meant," said Pippin. "We hobbits ought to stick together, and we will. I shall go, unless they chain me up. There must be someone with intelligence in the party."
"Then you certainly will not be chosen, Peregrine Took," said Gandalf, looking in through the window, which was near the ground. "But you are all worrying yourselves unnecessarily. Nothing is decided yet."
"Nothing decided?" cried Pippin. "Then what were you all doing? You were all shut up for hours." "Talking," said Bilbo. "There was a deal of talk, and every one had an eye-opener. Even old Gandalf. I think Legolas' bit of news about Gollum caught even him on the hop, though he passed it off."
"You were wrong," said Gandalf. "You were inattentive. I had already heard of it from Gwaihir. If you want to know, the only real eye-openers, as you put it, were you and Frodo. And I was the only one that was not surprised."
"Well, anyway," said Bilbo, "nothing was decided beyond choosing poor Frodo and Sam. I was afraid all the time that it might come to that, if I was let off. But if you ask me, Elrond will send out a fair number, when the reports come in. Have they started yet, Gandalf?"
"Yes," said the wizard. "Some of the scouts has been sent out already. More will go tomorrow. Elrond is sending elves, and they will get in touch with the rangers, and maybe with Thranduil's folk in Mirkwood. And Aragorn has gone with Elrond's sons. We shall have to scour the lands all around for many long leagues before any move is made. So cheer up, Frodo. You will probably make quite a long stay here."
Said Sam gloomily. "We'll just wait long enough for winter to come." "That can't be helped," said Bilbo. It's your fault partly, Frodo, my lad, insisting on waiting for my birthday. A funny way of honouring it, I can't help thinking. Not the day I would have chosen for letting the SBs into Bag End, but there it is. You can't wait now till spring, and you can't go till the reports come back. When winter first begins to bite, and stones crack in the frosty night, when pools are black and trees are bare, 'tis evil in the wild to fare. But that, I am afraid, will be just your luck."
"I am afraid it will," said Gandalf. "We can't start until we have found out about the riders."
"I thought they were all destroyed in the flood," said Merry.
"You cannot destroy ringwraiths like that," said Gandalf. "The power of their master is in them, and they stand or fall by him. We hope that they were all unhorsed and unmasked, and so made for a while less dangerous. But we must find out for certain. In the meantime, you should try and forget your troubles, Frodo. I do not know if I can do anything to help you, but I will whisper this in your ears. Someone said that intelligence should be needed in your party. He was right. I think I shall come with you."
So great was Frodo's delight at this announcement that Gandalf left the window-sill, where he had been sitting, and took off his hat and bowed.
"I only said I think I shall come. Do not count on anything yet. In this matter Elrond will have much to say, and your friend the Strider. Which reminds me, I want to see Elrond. I must be off."
How long do you think I shall have here?" said Frodo to Bilbo when Gandalf had gone. "Oh, I don't know. I can't count days in Rivendell," said Bilbo. "But quite long, I should think. We can have many a good talk. What about helping me with my book and making a start on the next? Have you thought of an ending?" "Yes, several, and all are dark and unpleasant," said Frodo. "Oh, that won't do," said Bilbo. "Books ought to have good endings. How would this do? And they all settled down and lived together happily ever after." "It will do well, if it ever comes to that," said Frodo. "Ah, and where will they live? That's what I always wonder." For a while, the hobbits continued to talk and think of the past journey and of the perils that lay ahead. But such was the virtue of the land of Rivendell that soon all fear and anxiety was lifted from their minds. The future, good or ill, was not forgotten, but ceased to have any power over the present. Health and hope grew strong in them, and they were content with each good day as it came. taking pleasure in every meal and in every word and song. So the days slipped away, as each morning dawned bright and fair, and each evening followed cool and clear. But autumn was waning fast. Slowly the golden light faded to pale silver, and the lingering leaves fell from the naked trees. A wind began to blow chill from the misty mountains to the east. The hunter's moon waxed round in the night sky, and put to flight all lesser stars. But low in the south one star shone red. Every night as the moon waned again, it shone brighter and brighter. Frodo could see it from his window, deep in the heavens, burning like a watchful eye that glared above the trees on the brink of the valley. The hobbits had been nearly 2 months in the house of Elrond, and November had gone by with the last shreds of autumn, and December was passing when the scouts began to return. Some had gone north beyond the springs of the Horwell into the Etten Moors, and others had gone west. With the help of Aragorn and the rangers had searched the lands far down the Grey Flood, as far as Tharbad. There the old north road crossed the river by a ruined town. Many had gone east and south, and some of these had crossed the mountains and entered Mirkwood, while others had climbed the pass at the source of the Gladden River, and had come down into the Wilderland and over the Gladden Fields, and so at length had reached the old home of Radagast at Rhosgobel. Radagast was not there, and they had returned over the high pass that was called the Dimril Stair. The sons of Elrond, Eladan, and Elrohir were the last to return. They had made a great journey, passing down the Silver Lode into a strange country, but of their errand they would not speak to any save to Elrond. In no region had the messengers discovered any signs of tidings of the riders or other servants of the enemy. Even from the eagles of the misty mountains they had learned no fresh news. Nothing had been seen or heard of Gollum, but the wild wolves were still gathering, and they were hunting again far up the great river. 3 of the black horses had been found at once drowned in the flooded ford. On the rocks of the rapids below, its searchers discovered the bodies of 5 more, and also a long black cloak, slashed and tattered. Of the black riders no other trace was to be seen, and nowhere was their presence to be felt. It seemed that they had vanished from the north.
8 out of 9 are accounted for at the least, said Gandalf. It is rash to be too sure, yet I think that we may hope now that the ring race was scattered, and have been obliged to return as best they could to their master in Mordor, empty and shapeless. If that is so, it will be some time before they can begin the hunt again. Of course the enemy has other servants, but they will have to journey all the way up to the borders of Rivendell before they can pick up our trail. And if we are careful, that will be hard to find. But we must delay no longer.
Elrond summoned the hobbits to him. He looked gravely at Frodo.
The time has come, he said. If the ring is to set out, it must go soon. But those who go with it must not count on their errand being aided by war or force. They must pass into the domain of the enemy far from aid. Do you still hold to your words, Frodo, that you will be the ring-bearer?
I do, said Frodo. I will go with Sam.
Then I cannot help you much, not even with counsel, said Elrond. I can foresee very little of your road, and how your task is to be achieved I do not know. The shadow has crept now to the feet of the mountains, and draws nigh, even to the borders of the Grey Flood, and under the shadow all is dark to me. You will meet many foes, some open, and some disguised, and you may find friends upon your way when you least look for it. I will send out messages such as I can contrive to those whom I know in the wide world, but so perilous are the lands now become that some may well miscarry, or come no quicker than yourself. And I will choose you companions to go with you, as far as they will or fortune allows. The number must be few, since your hope is in speed and secrecy. Had I a host of elves in armor of the elder days, it would avail little, save to arouse the power of Mordor. The company of the ring shall be 9, and the 9 walkers shall be set against the 9 riders that are evil. With you and your faithful servant, Gandalf, will go, for this shall be his great task, and may be the end of his labors. For the rest, they shall represent the other free peoples of the world, elves, dwarves, and men. Legolas shall be for the elves, and Gimli, son of Gloin, for the dwarves. They are willing to go at least to the passes of the mountains, and maybe beyond. For men, you shall have Aragorn, son of Arathorn, for the ring of Isildur concerns him closely."
"Strider!" cried Frodo.
"Yes," he said with a smile. "I ask leave once again to be your companion, Frodo."
"Oh, I would have begged you to come," said Frodo. "Only I thought you were going to Minas Tirith with Boromir."
"I am," said Aragorn. "And the sword that was broken shall be reforged ere I set out to war. But your road and our road lie together for many hundreds of miles. Therefore Boromir will also be in the company. He is a valiant man." "There remain 2 more to be found," said Elrond. "These I will consider. Of my household I may find some that it seems good to me to send," cried Pippin in dismay. "That is because you do not understand and cannot imagine what lies ahead," said Elrond. "Neither does Frodo," said Gandalf, unexpectedly supporting Pippin. "Nor do any of us see clearly. It is true that if these hobbits understood the danger they would not dare to go, but they would still wish to go, or wish that they dared, and be ashamed and unhappy. I think, Elrond, that in this matter it would be well to trust rather to their friendship than to great wisdom. Even if you chose for us an elf lord, such as Glorfindel, he could not storm the Dark Tower, nor open the road to the fire by the power that is in him." "You speak gravely," said Elrond. "But I am in doubt. The Shire, I forebode, is not free now from peril, and these 2 I had thought to send back there as messengers, to do what they could, according to their fashion of their country, to warn the people of their danger. In any case, I judge that the younger of these 2, Peregrine Took, should remain. My heart is against his going." said Pippin.
"For otherwise I shall follow the company."
"Let it be so, then. You shall go," said Elrond, and he sighed. "Now the tale of 9 is filled. In 7 days the company must depart." The sword of Elendil was forged anew by elvish smiths, and on its blade was traced a device of 7 stars set between the crescent moon and the rayed sun. And about them was written many runes, for Aragorn, son of Arathorn, was going to war upon the marches of Mordor. Very bright was that sword when it was made whole again. The light of the sun shone redly in it, and the light of the moon shone cold. And its edge was hard and keen. And Aragorn gave it a new name, and called it Andúril, Flame of the West. Aragorn and Gandalf walked together or sat speaking of their road and the perils they would meet, and they pondered the storied and figured maps and books of lore that were in the house of Elrond. Sometimes Frodo was with them, but he was content to lean on their guidance, and he spent as much time as he could with Bilbo. In those last days the hobbits sat together in the evening in the Hall of Fire, and there among many tales they had told in full the lay of Beren and Luthien, and the winning of the great jewel. But in the day, while Merry and Pippin were out and about, Frodo and Sam were to be found with Bilbo in his own small room. Then Bilbo would read passages from his book, which still seemed very incomplete, or scraps of his verses, or would take notes of Frodo's adventures. On the morning of the last day, Frodo was alone with Bilbo, and the old hobbit pulled out from under his bed a wooden box. He lifted the lid and fumbled inside.
Here is your sword," he said. "But it was broken, you know. I took it to keep it safe, but I've forgotten to ask if the smiths could mend it. No time now. So I thought perhaps you would care to have this, don't you know?"
He took from the box a small sword in an old shabby leather scabbard. Then he drew it, and its polished and well-tended blade glittered suddenly, cold and bright. "This is Sting," he said, and thrust it with little effort deep into a wooden beam.
"Take it if you like. I shan't want it again, I expect."
Frodo accepted it gratefully.
"Oh, so here is this,"
said Bilbo, bringing out a parcel which seemed to be rather heavy for its size. He unwound several folds of old cloth and held up a small shirt of mail. It was close woven of many rings, as subtle almost as linen, cold as ice, and harder than steel. It shone like moonlit silver, and was studded with white gems. It was a belt of pearl and crystal.
"It's a pretty thing, isn't it?"
said Bilbo, moving it in the light.
"And useful. It is my dwarf mail that Thorin gave me. I got it back from Mickle Delvig before I started, and packed it with my luggage. I brought all the mementos of my journey away with me, except the ring. But I did not expect to use this, and I don't need it now, except to look at it sometimes. You hardly feel any weight when you put it on. I should look... well, I don't think I should look right in it, said Frodo. Just what I said myself, said Bilbo. But never mind about looks. You can wear it under your outer clothes. Come on, you must share this secret with me. Don't tell anybody else, but I should feel happier if I knew you were wearing it. I have a fancy it would turn even the knives of the Black Riders. He ended in a low voice. Very well, I will take it, said Frodo. Bilbo put it on him, and fastened Sing upon the glittering belt. And then Frodo put over the top his old weather-stained breeches tunic and jacket. Just a plain hobbit you look, said Bilbo, but there is more about you now that appears on the surface. Good luck to you. He turned away and looked out of the window, trying to hum a tune. I cannot thank you as I should, Bilbo, for this, and for all your past kindnesses, said Frodo. Don't try, said the old hobbit, turning around and slapping him on the back. Ow! He cried. You are too hard now to slap, but there you are. Hobbits must stick together, and especially Bagginses. All I ask in return is, take as much care of yourself as you can, and bring back all the news you can, and any old songs and tales you can come by. I'll do my best to finish my book before you return. I should like to write the second book, if I am spared. He broke off and turned to the window again, singing softly. I sit by the fire and think of all that I have seen, of meadow flowers and butterflies in summers that have been, of yellow leaves and gossamer in autumns that there were, with morning mist and silver sun and wind upon my hair. I sit beside the fire and think of how the world will be when winter comes without a spring that I shall ever see. For still there are so many things that I have never seen. In every wood, in every spring, there is a different green. I sit by the fire and think of people long ago, and people who will see a world that I will never know. But all the while I sit and think of times there were before, I listen of returning feet and voices at the door. It was a cold grey day near the end of December. The east wind was streaming through the bare branches of the trees and seething in the dark pines on the hills. Ragged clouds were hurrying overhead, dark and low. As the cheerless shadows of the early evening began to fall, the company made ready to set out. They were to start at dusk, for Elrond counselled them to journey under cover of night as often as they could, until they were far from Rivendell. "You should fear the many eyes of the servants of Sauron," he said. "I do not doubt that the news of the discomfiture of the riders has already reached him, and he will be filled with wrath. Soon now his spies on foot and wing will be abroad, in the northern lands. Even of the sky above you must beware as you go on your way." The company took little gear of war, for their hope was in secrecy, not in battle. Aragorn had Anduril, but no other weapon, and he went forth clad only in rusty green and brown, as a ranger of the wilderness. Boromir had a long sword, in fashion like Anduril, but of less lineage, and he bore also a shield, and his war horn. "Loud and clear it sounds in the valleys of the hills," he said, "and then let all the foes of Gondor flee." Putting it to his lips, he blew a blast, and the echoes leapt from rock to rock, and all that heard that voice in Rivendell sprang to their feet. "Slow should you be to win that horn again, Boromir," said Elrond, "until you stand once more on the borders of your land, and dire need is on you." "Maybe," said Boromir, But always I have let my horn cry at setting forth, and though thereafter we may walk in the shadows, I will not go forth as a thief in the night." Gimli the dwarf alone wore openly a short shirt of steel rings, for dwarves make light of burdens, and in his belt was a broad-bladed axe. Legolas had a bow and a quiver, and at his belt a long white knife. The younger hobbits wore the swords that they had taken from the barrow, but Frodo took only Sting, and his mail coat, as Bilbo wished, remained hidden. Gandalf bore his staff, but girt at his side was the elven sword Glamdring, the mate of Orcrist, that lay now upon the breast of Thorin under the lonely mountain. All were furnished by Elrond with thick warm clothes, and they had jackets and cloaks lined with fur. Spare food and clothes and blankets and other needs were laden on a pony, none other than the poor beast that they had brought from Bree. The stay in Rivendell had worked a great wonder of change on him. He was glossy and seemed to have the vigor of youth. It was Sam who had insisted on choosing him, declaring that Bill, as he called him, would pine if he did not come.
"That animal can nearly talk," he said, "and would talk if he stayed here much longer. He gave me a look as plain as Mr. Pippin could speak it. If you don't let me go with you, Sam, I'll follow you on my own."
So Bill was going as the beast of burden, yet he was the only member of the company that did not seem depressed. Their farewells had been said in the great hall by the fire, and they were only waiting now for Gandalf, who had not yet come out of the house. A gleam of firelight came from the open doors, and soft lights were glowing in many windows. Bilbo, huddled in a cloak, stood silent on the doorstep beside Frodo. Aragorn sat with his head bowed to his knees. Only Elrond knew fully what this hour meant to him. The others could be seen as grey shapes in the darkness. Sam was standing by the pony, sucking his teeth and staring moodily into the gloom where the river roared stonily below. His desire for adventure was at its lowest ebb.
"Bill, my lad," he said, "you oughtn't to have took up with us. You could have stayed here and ate the best hay till the new grass comes."
Bill switched his tail and said nothing. Sam eased the pack on his shoulders, and went over anxiously in his mind all the things that he had stowed it in, wondering if he had forgotten anything, his chief treasure, his cooking gear, and the little box of salt that he always carried and refilled when he could. A good supply of pipeweed, but not near enough, I'll warrant. Flint and tinder, woolen hose, linen, various small belongings of his master's that Frodo had forgotten, and Sam had stowed to bring them out in triumph when they were called for. He went through them all.
"Rope,"
he muttered.
"and only last night you said to yourself, 'Sam, what about a bit of rope?' You want it. Well, I'll want it. Can't get it now."
At that moment Elrond came out with Gandalf, and he called the company to him. "This is my last word," he said in a low voice. "The ring-bearer is setting out on the quest of Mount Doom. On him alone is any charge laid, neither to cast away the ring, nor to deliver it to any of the servant of the enemy, nor indeed to let any handle it, save members of the company and the council, and only then in gravest need. The others go with him as free companions, to help him on his way. You may tarry or come back, or turn aside to other paths as chance allows. The further you go, the less easy it will be to withdraw. Yet no oath, no bond is laid to go further than you will, for you do not yet know the strength of your hearts, and you cannot foresee what each may meet upon the road."
Faithless is he that says farewell when the road darkens,
said Gimli. "Maybe," said Elrond. "But let him not vow to walk in the dark who has not seen nightfall."
Its word makes strength in a quaking heart,
said Gimli. "Or break it," said Elrond. "Look not too far ahead, but go now, with good hearts. Farewell, and may the blessing of elves and men and all free folk go with you. May the stars shine upon your faces." cried Bilbo, stuttering in the cold. Many others of Elrond's household stood in the shadows and watched them go, bidding them farewell with soft voices. There was no laughter, and no song or music. At last they turned away and faded silently into the dusk. They crossed the bridge and wound slowly up the long steep paths that led out to the cloven vale of Rivendell, and they came at length to the high moor where the wind hissed through the heather. Then, with one glance at the last homely house twinkling below them, they strode away far into the night. At the ford of Bruinen they left the road and, turning southwards, went on by narrow paths among the folded lands. Their purpose was to hold this course west of the mountains for many miles and days. The country was much rougher and more barren than the green vale of the great river and Wilderland on the other side of the range, and their going would be slow, but they hoped in this way to escape the notice of unfriendly eyes. The spies of Sauron had hitherto seldom been seen in this empty country, and the paths were little known except to the people of Rivendell. Gandalf walked in front, and with him went Aragorn, who knew this land even in the dark. The others were in file behind, and Legolas, whose eyes were keen, was the rear guard. The first part of their journey was hard and dreary, and Frodo remembered little of it, save the wind. For many sunless days an icy blast came from the mountains in the east, and no garments seemed able to keep out its searching fingers. Though the company was well clad, they seldom felt warm, either moving or at rest. They slept uneasily during the middle of the day, in some hollow of the land, or hidden under the tangled thorn bushes that grew in thickets in many places. In the late afternoon they were roused by the watch and took their chief meal, cold and cheerless as a rule, for they could seldom risk the lighting of a fire. In the evening they went on again, always as nearly southward as they could find a way. At first it seemed to the hobbits, although they walked and stumbled until they were weary, they were creeping forwards like snails, and getting nowhere. Each day the land looked much the same as it had the day before, yet steadily the mountains were drawing nearer. South of Rivendell they rose ever higher, and bent westwards, and about the feet of the main range there was tumbled an ever wider land of bleak hills and deep valleys filled with turbulent waters. Paths were few and winding, and led them often only to the edge of some sheer fall, or down into treacherous swamps. They had been a fortnight on the way when the weather changed. The wind suddenly fell and then veered round to the south. The shift-flowing clouds lifted and melted away, and the sun came out, pale and bright. There came a cold, clear dawn at the end of a long, stumbling night march. The travellers reached a slow ridge crowded with ancient holly trees whose grey-green trunks seemed to have been built out of the very stone of the hills. Their dark leaves shone and their berries glowed red in the light of the rising sun. Away in the south Frodo could see the dim shapes of lofty mountains that seemed now to stand across the paths that the company was taking. At the left of this high range rose 3 peaks. The tallest and nearest stood up like a tooth, tipped with snow. Its great bare northern precipice was still largely in the shadow, but where the sunlight slanted upon it, it glowed red. Gandalf stood at Frodo's side and looked out under his hand.
"We have done well," he said. "We have reached the borders of the country that men call Hollin. Many elves lived here in happier days when Eregion was its name. 45 leagues as the crow flies we have come, though many long miles further our feet have walked. The land and the weather will be wilder now, but perhaps all the more dangerous."
Dangerous or not, a real sunrise is mighty welcome,
said Frodo, throwing back his hood and letting the morning light fall on his face. Said Pippin.
"No," said Gandalf, "but you see further ahead in the clear light. Beyond those peaks the range bends round southwest. There are many maps in Elrond's house, but I suppose you never thought to look at them,"
said Pippin.
but I don't remember them. Frodo has a better head for that sort of thing.
"I need no map,"
said Gimli, who had come up with Legolas and was gazing out before him with a strange light in his deep eyes.
"There is the land where our fathers worked of old.
and we have wrought the image of those mountains into many works of metal and of stone, and into many songs and tales. They stand tall in our dreams. Baraz, Zirak, Shathur. Only once before I have seen them from afar in waking life, but I know them and their names, for under them lies Khazad-dûm, the Dweroed elf, that is now called the Black Pit. Moria in the Elvish tongue. Yonder stands Barazinmar, the Red Horn, cruel Caradras, and beyond him are Silvertine and Cloudyhead, Celebdil the White, and Fanuidhol the Grey, that we call Zirak Zigil, and Bundushathur. There the misty mountains divide, and between their arms lies the deep-shadowed valley which we cannot forget. Azanulbizar, the Dimril Dale, which the elves call Nandu Hirion. It is for the Dimril Dale that we are making, said Gandalf. If we climb the pass that is called Redhorn Gate, under the far side of Caradhras, we shall come down by the Dimril Stair into the deep vale of the dwarves. There lies the Mirrormere, and there the river Silverlode rises in its icy springs, said Gimli. May you have joy in the sight, my good dwarf, said Gandalf. But whatever you may do, we at least cannot stay in that valley. We must go down the Silverlode into the secret woods, and so to the great river, and then... He paused.
Yes? And where then?
Asked Merry. To the end of the journey. In the end, said Gandalf. We cannot look too far ahead. Let us be glad that the first stage is safely over. I think we will rest here, not only today, but tonight as well. There is a wholesome air about Hollin. Much evil must befall a country before it wholly forgets the elves, if once they dwelt there, said Legolas. The elves of this land were of a race strange to us in the Sylvan folk, and the trees and grass do not now remember them. Only I hear the stones lament them. Deep they delved us, fair they wrought us, high they builded us, but they are gone. They are gone. They sought the havens long ago. That morning they lit a fire in a deep hollow shrouded by great bushes of holly, and their supper breakfast was merrier than it had been since they set out. They did not hurry to bed afterwards, for they expected to have all the night to sleep in, and they did not mean to go on again until the evening of the next day. Only Aragorn was silent and restless. After a while, he left the company and wandered on to the ridge. There he stood in the shadow of a tree, looking out southwards and westwards, with his head posed as if he was listening. Then he returned to the brink of the dell and looked down at the others laughing and talking.
Well, what's the matter, Strider?
Merry called up.
What are you looking for? Do you miss the east wind?
He answered. But I miss something. I have been in the country of Holland for many reasons. No folk dwell here now, but many other creatures live here at all times, especially birds. Yet now all things but you are silent. I can feel it. There is no sound for miles about us, and your voices seem to make the ground echo. I do not understand it. Gandalf looked up with a sudden interest. Well, what do you guess is the reason? He asked. Is there more in it that surprise at seeing 4 hobbits, not to mention the rest of us, where people are so seldom seen or heard? I hope that it is, answered Aragorn. But I have a sense of watchfulness and of fear that I have never had here before. Then we must be more careful, said Gandalf. If you bring a ranger with you, it is well to pay attention to him, especially if the ranger is Aragorn. We must stop talking aloud, rest quietly, and set the watch. It was Sam's turn that day to take the first watch, but Aragorn joined him. The others fell asleep. Then the silence grew until even Sam felt it. The breathing of the sleepers could be plainly heard.
The swish of the pony's tail and the occasional movements of his feet became loud noises. Sam could hear his own joints creaking if he stirred. Dead silence was around him, and over all hung a clear blue sky, as the sun rode up to the east. Away in the south a dark patch appeared, and grew, and drove north like flying smoke in the wind.
What's that, Strider? It don't look like a cloud,
said Sam in a whisper to Aragorn. He made no answer. He was gazing intently at the sky. But before long Sam could see for himself what was approaching. Flocks of birds, flying at great speed, were wheeling and circling, and traversing all the land as if they were searching for something, and they were steadily drawing nearer.
Tight and still,
hissed Aragorn, putting Sam down into the shade of a holly bush. For a whole regiment of birds had broken away suddenly from the main host, and came flying low, straight towards the ridge. Sam thought they were a kind of crow of large size. As they passed overhead in so dense a throng that their shadow followed them darkly over the ground below, one harsh croak was heard. Not until they had dwindled into the distance, north and west, and the sky was again clear, would Aragorn rise. Then he sprang up and went and wakened Gandalf. "Regiments of the Black Crows are flying over all the land between the mountains and the Grey Flood," he said, "and they have passed over Hollin. They are not natives here, they are Crebain, out of Fanghorn and Dunland. I do not know what they are about. Possibly there is some trouble away south from which they are fleeing, but I think they are spying out the land. I have also glimpsed many hawks flying high up in the sky. I think we ought to move again this evening. Hollin is no longer wholesome for us. It is being watched."
"And in that case is the Red Horn Gate," said Gandalf. "And how we can get over that without being seen I cannot imagine. But we will think of what when we must. As for moving as soon as it is dark, I am afraid that you are right."
"Luckily our fire made little smoke and had burned low before the Creban came," said Aragorn. "It must be put out and not lit again." "Well, if that isn't a plague and a nuisance," said Pippin. The news, no fire, and a move again by night, had been broken to him as soon as he woke in the late afternoon. "All because a pack of crows! I had looked forward to a real good meal tonight, something hot."
"Well, you can go on looking forward," said Gandalf. "There may be many unexpected feasts ahead for you. For myself, I would like a pipe to smoke in comfort and warmer feet. However, we are certain for one thing at any rate. It will get warmer as we get south."
too warm, I shouldn't wonder,
muttered Sam to Frodo.
"But I'm beginning to think it's time we got a sight of that fiery mountain and saw the end of the road, so to speak. I thought at first that this here Red Horn, or whatever its name is, might be it, till Gimli spoke his piece. A fair jaw-cracker dwarf language must be."
Maps conveyed nothing to Sam's mind, and all distances in these strange lands seemed so vast that he was quite out of his reckoning. All that day the company remained in hiding. The dark birds passed over now and again, but as the westerning sun grew red they disappeared southwards. At dusk the company set out, and turning now half east, they steered their course towards Caradhras, which far away still glowed faintly red in the last light of the vanishing sun. One by one white stars sprang forth as the sky faded. Guided by Aragorn, they struck a good path. It looked to Frodo like the remains of an ancient road that had once been broad and well planned, from Hollin to the mountain pass. The moon, now at the full, rose over the mountains and cast a pale light, in which the shadows of stones were black. Many of them looked to have been worked by hands, though now they lay tumbled and ruinous in a bleak, barren land. It was the cold, chill hour before the first stir of dawn, and the moon was low. Frodo looked up at the sky. Suddenly, he saw or felt a shadow pass over the high stars, as if for a moment they faded and then flashed out again. He shivered.
"Did you see anything pass over?"
He whispered to Gandalf, who was just ahead.
"No, but I felt it, whatever it was,"
he answered.
"It may be nothing, only a wisp of cloud."
"It was moving fast then," muttered Aragorn, "and not with the wind." Nothing further happened that night. But the next morning dawned even brighter than before, but the air was chill again. Already the wind was turning back towards the east. For 2 more nights they marched on, climbing steadily but ever more slowly as their road wound up into the hills, and the mountains towered up, nearer and nearer. On the 3rd morning Caradhras rose before them, a mighty peak, tipped with snow like silver, but with sheer naked sides, dull red as if stained with blood. There was a black look in the sky, and the sun was wan. The wind had gone now round to the northeast. Gandalf snuffed the air and looked back.
"Winter deepens behind us,"
he said quietly to Aragorn.
"The heights away north are whither than they were. Snow is lying far down their shoulders. Tonight we shall be on our way high up towards the Red Horn Gate. We may well be seen by watchers on that narrow path, and waylaid by some evil, but the weather may prove a more deadly enemy than any. What do you think of your course now, Aragorn?"
Frodo overheard these words and understood that Gandalf and Aragorn were continuing some debate that had begun long before. He listened anxiously. "I think no good of our course from beginning to end, as you know well, Gandalf," answered Aragorn, "and perils known and unknown will grow as we go on, but we must go on, and it is no good our delaying the passage of the mountains. Further south there are no passes, till one comes to the Gap of Rohan. I do not trust that way since your news of Saruman. Who knows which side now the marshals of the Horse Lords serve?"
"Who knows indeed," said Gandalf, "but there is another way, and not by the pass of Caradhras, a dark and secret way that we have spoken of."
"But let us not speak of it again, not yet. Say nothing to the others, I beg, not until it is plain that there is no other way."
"We must decide before we go further," answered Gandalf.
"Let us weigh the matter in our minds while the others rest and sleep," said Aragorn. In the late afternoon, while the others were finishing their breakfast, Gandalf and Aragorn were aside together and stood looking at Caradhras. Its sides were now dark and sullen, and its head was in grey cloud. Frodo watched them, wondering which way the debate would go. When they returned to the company, Gandalf spoke, and he knew that it had been decided to face the weather and the high pass. He was relieved. He could not guess what was the other dark and secret way, but the very mention of it had seemed to fill Aragorn with dismay, and Frodo was glad that it had been abandoned.
"From signs that we have seen lately," said Gandalf, "I fear that the Red Horn Gate may be watched, and also I have doubts of the weather that is coming up behind. Snow may come. We must go with all the speed that we can. Even so, it will take us more than 2 marches before we reach the top of the pass. Dark will come early this evening. We must leave as soon as you can get ready."
"I will add a word of advice, if I may," said Boromir. "I was born under the shadow of the White Mountains, and know something of the journey in the high places. We shall meet bitter cold, if no worse, before we come down on the other side. It will not help us to keep so secret that we are frozen to death. When we leave here, where there are still a few trees and bushes, each of us should carry a faggot of wood, as large as he can bear."
"And Bill could take a bit more, couldn't you, lad?"
said Sam. The pony looked at him mournfully.
"Very well," said Gandalf, "but we must not use the wood, not unless it is a choice between fire and death."
The company set out again, with good speed at first, but soon their way became steep and difficult. The twisting and climbing road had in many places almost disappeared, and was blocked with many fallen stones. The night grew deadly dark under great clouds. A bitter wind swirled among the rocks. By midnight they had climbed to the knees of the great mountains. The narrow path now wound under a sheer wall of cliffs to the left, above which the grim flanks of Caradhras towered up invisible in the gloom. On the right was a gulf of darkness where the land fell suddenly into a deep ravine. Laboriously they climbed the sharp slope and halted for a moment at the top. Frodo felt a soft touch on his face. He put up his arm and saw the dim white flakes of snow settling on his sleeve. They went on, but before long the snow was falling fast, filling all the air and swirling into Frodo's eyes. The dark bent shapes of Gandalf and Aragorn only a pace or 2 ahead could hardly be seen.
"I don't like this at all,"
panted Sam just behind.
"Snow's all right on a fine morning, but I like to be in bed while it's falling. I wish this lot would go off to Hobbiton. Folk might welcome it there.
Except on the high moors of the North Farthing, a heavy fall was rare in the Shire, and was regarded as a pleasant event and a chance for fun. No living hobbit, save Bilbo, could remember the fell winter of 1311, where white wolves invaded the Shire over the frozen Brandywine. Gandalf halted. Snow was thick on his hood and shoulders. It was already ankle-deep about his boots.
"It is as I feared," he said. "What do you say now, Aragorn?"
"That I feared it too," Aragorn answered. "But less than other things. I knew the risk of snow, though it seldom falls heavily so far south, save high up in the mountains. But we are not high yet. We are still far down. There are paths that are usually open all the winter."
"I wonder if this is the contrivance of the enemy,"
said Boromir.
"They say in my land he can guard the storms in the mountains of shadow that stand upon the borders of Mordor. He has strange powers and many allies."
"His arm has grown long indeed,"
said Gimli.
"if he can draw snow down from the north to trouble us here 300 leagues away."
"His arm has grown long," said Gandalf.
While they were halted, the wind died down, and the snow slackened until it almost ceased. They stamped on again, but they had not gone more than a furlong when the storm returned with fresh fury. The wind whistled and the snow became a blinding blizzard. Soon even Boromir found it hard to keep going. The hobbits bent nearly double, toiled along behind the taller folk, but it was plain that they could not go much further. If the snow continued, Frodo's feet felt like lead. Pippin was dragging behind. Even Gimli, stout as any dwarf could be, was grumbling as he trudged. The company halted suddenly, as if they had come to an agreement without any words being spoken. They heard eerie noises in the darkness around them. It may have been only a trick of the wind in the cracks and gullies of the rocky wall, but the sounds were those of shrill cries and wild howls of laughter. Stones began to fall from the mountainside, whistling over their heads or crashing into the path beside them. Every now and again they heard a dull rumble, as a great boulder rolled down from hidden heights above.
"We cannot go further tonight," said Boromir. "Let those call it the wind who will. There are vague voices on the air, and these stones are aimed at us."
"I do call it the wind," said Aragorn. "But that does not make what you say untrue. There are many evil and unfriendly things in the world that have little love for those that go on two legs, and yet are not in league with Sauron, but have purposes of their own. Some have been in this world longer than he,"
"Atlas was called the Cruel and had a new name,"
said Gimli.
"long years ago when rumour of Sauron had not been heard in these lands. It matters little who is the enemy if we cannot beat off the attack," said Gandalf.
"But what can we do?" cried Pippin miserably. He was leaning on Merry and Frodo, and he was shivering.
"Either stop where we are or go back,"
said Gandalf.
"It is no good going on. Only a little higher, if I remember rightly. This path leaves the cliffs and runs into the wide shallow through the bottom of a long, hard slope. We should have no shelter here from now, or stones, or anything else."
"And it is no good going back on the storm hollow,"
said Aragorn.
"We have passed no place on the way up that offered more shelter than this cliff that we are under now."
Shelter.
Muttered Sam.
If this is shelter, then one wall and no roof make a house.
The company now gathered together as close to the cliff as they could. It faced southwards, and near the bottom it leaned out a little, so that they hoped it would give them more protection from the northerly wind and from the falling stones. But eddying blasts swirled round them, from every side, and the snow flowed down in ever denser clouds. They huddled together with their backs to the wall. Bill the pony stood patiently but dejectedly in front of the hobbits, and screened them a little, but before long the drifting snow was above his hocks, and it went on mounting. If they had no larger companions, the hobbits would soon have been entirely buried. A great sleepiness came over Frodo. He felt himself sinking fast into a warm and hazy dream. He thought a fire was heating his toes, and out of the shadows on the other side of the hearth he heard Bilbo's voice speaking.
I don't think much of your diary,
He said,
no storm's object. There was no need to come back and report that. But I wanted sleep, Bilbo.
Frodo answered with an effort. When he felt himself shaken, he came back painfully to wakefulness. Boromir had lifted him off the ground and out of a nest of snow.
This will be the death of the halflings, Gandalf!
Said Boromir.
It is useless to sit here until the snow goes over our heads. We must do something to save ourselves.
Give them this,
said Gandalf, searching for his pack and drawing out a leathern flask.
just a mouthful each, for all of us. It is very precious. It is Furiborn of the cordial of Enladris. Elrond gave it to me at our parting. Pass it round!
As soon as Frodo had swallowed a little of the warm and fragrant liquor, he felt a new strength of heart, and the heavy drowsiness left his limbs. The others also revived and found fresh hope and vigor. But the snow did not relent. It whirled about them thicker than ever, and the wind blew louder.
What do you say to fire?
Asked Boromir suddenly.
The choice seems near now between fire and death, Gandalf. Doubtless we have hidden from all unfriendly eyes when the snow has covered us, but that will not help us. You may make a fire if you can, answered Gandalf. If there are any watchers that endure this storm, then they can see us fire and know.
As though they had brought wood and kindlings by the advice of Boromir, it passed the skill of elf or even dwarf to strike a flame that would hold amid the swirling wind to catch the wet fuel. At last, reluctantly, Gandalf himself took a hand. Picking up a faggot, he held it aloft for a moment, and then with a word of command,
Now, run it, Harmon!
He thrust the end of his staff into the midst of it. At once, a great spout of green and blue flame sprang out, and the wood flared and sputtered.
If there are any to see, then I at least am revealed to them, he said. I have written Gandalf is here in signs that all can read, from Rivendell to the mouths of Anduin.
But the company cared no longer for the watchers or unfriendly eyes. Their hearts would rejoice to see the light of the fire. The wood burned merrily, though all around it the snow hissed, and pools of slush crept under their feet. They warmed their hands gladly at the blaze. There they stood, stooping in a circle around the little dancing and blowing flames. A red light was on their tired and anxious faces. Behind them the night was like a black wall. But the wood was burning fast and the snow still fell. The fire burned low, and the last faggot was thrown on.
The night is getting old,
said Aragorn.
The dawn is not far off. If any dawn can pierce these clouds, said Gimli.
Boromir stepped out of the circle and stared up into the blackness.
The snow is growing less, he said, and the wind is quieter.
Frodo gazed warily at the flakes still falling out of the dark to be revealed white for a moment in the light of the dying fire, but for a long time he could see no sign of their slackening. Then suddenly, as sleep was beginning to creep over him again, he was aware that the wind had indeed fallen, and the flakes were becoming larger and fewer. Very slowly a dim light began to grow. At last the snow stopped altogether. As the light grew stronger, it showed a silent, shrouded world. Below their refuge were white humps and domes and shapeless deeps beneath which the path that they had trodden was altogether lost. But the heights above were hidden in great clouds, still heavy with the threat of snow. Gimli looked up and shook his head.
Caradhras has not forgiven us,
he said.
He has more snow yet to fling at us if we go on. The sooner we go back and down, the better.
To this all agreed, but their retreat was now difficult. It might well prove impossible. Only a few paces from the ashes of their fire the snow lay many feet deep, higher than the heads of the hobbits. In places it has been scooped and piled by the wind into great drifts against the cliff.
If Gandalf would go before us with a bright flame, he might melt a path for you, said Legolas.
The storm had troubled him little, and he alone of the company remained still light of heart.
If elves could fly over mountains, they might fetch the sun and to save us, answered Gandalf. But I must have something to work on. I cannot burn snow.
Well, said Boromir, when heads are at a loss, bodies must serve, as we say in my country.
The strongest of us must seek a way. See, though all is snow-clad, our path as we came up turned about that shoulder of rock down yonder. It was where the first snow began to burden us. If we could reach that point, maybe it would prove easier beyond. It is no more than a furlong off, I guess. Then let us force a path hither, you and I, said Aragorn. Aragorn was the tallest of the company, but Boromir, little less in height, was broader and heavier in build. He led the way, and Aragorn followed him. Slowly they moved off, and they were soon toiling heavily. In places the snow was breast high, and often Boromir seemed to be swimming or burrowing in his great arms rather than walking. Legolas watched them for a while with a smile upon his lips, and then he turned to the others. The strongest must seek a way, say you? But I say, let a ploughman plough, but choose an otter for swimming, and for running, light over grass and leaf, or over snow, an elf. With that he sprang forth nimbly, and then Frodo noticed, as if for the first time, though he had long known it, that the elf had no boots, but wore only light shoes, as he always did, and his feet made little imprint in the snow. Farewell, he said to Gandalf. I go to find the sun. Then, swift as a runner over the firm sand, he shot away, and quickly overtaking the toiling men, with a wave of his hand he passed them, and sped into the distance, and vanished round the rocky turn. The others waited, huddled together, watching until Boromir and Aragorn dwindled into black specks in the whiteness. At length they too passed from sight. The time dragged on. The clouds lowered, and now a few flakes of snow came curling down again. An hour maybe went by, though it seemed far longer. And then at last they saw Legolas coming back. At the same time Boromir and Aragorn reappeared round the bend far behind him, and came labouring up the slope. "Well," cried Legolas as he ran up, "I have not brought the sun. She is walking in the blue fields in the south, and a little wreath of snow on this red-horn hillock troubles her not at all. But I have brought back a gleam of good hope for those who are doomed to go on feet. There is the greatest midrift of all just beyond the turn, and there our strong men were almost buried. They despaired until I returned and told them that the drift was little wider than a wall, and on the other side the snow suddenly grows less, while further down it is no more than a white coverlet to cool a hobbit's toes." Growled Gimli.
It was no ordinary storm. It is the ill will of Caradhras. He does not love elves and dwarves, and that drift was laid to cut off our escape.
"But happily your Caradhras has forgotten that you have men with you," said Boromir, who came up at that moment. "And doughty men too, if I may say it, though lesser men with spades might have served you better. Still we have thrust a lane through the drift, and for that all here may